in here. I guess it's only fitting because we're talking about omens that warned of death. Yes, it's been a thing for centuries where people believe that their deaths were essentially like predetermined. Not only that, but they were warned, hey, you're going to die. And one of them is actually this gentleman who is named Archibald. Now, Archibald, he was better known as 13th Earl of Eglinton, I believe, Eglinton. And nonetheless, he lived in the 1800s and he was playing a round of golf. And he was playing and he was literally stopped dead in his tracks before he swung the club. And he was in Scotland. He suddenly stopped in the middle of the game. And what he did was he told his companion, I can play no more. It's basically called the gray man. So this gray man, this figure had been appearing to him, and this is the third time. So he stops the game of golf, and then he says, hey, what's going on? He says, I'm going home. So he retreats to his house, and then when he gets to his house, he dies that night. While he's handing a candlestick to a lady who was about to turn in for the evening. Nonetheless, the 13th Earl is his name, of Eglinton. He knew that he was going to die. And it's a pretty common thing. Did you know that in the funeral profession that I had been in for 13 years, I would go to the nursing homes facilities and I would go in and I'd seen this before, but then it took me a long time to really ask about it. They would always open the window. And I would say, why are you doing that? And they were like, well, we got to let the spirit out. I thought that was very interesting. Did you know that nursing homes will actually, they'll house, they'll foster, they'll take care of cats. And like a cat will wander the halls. There's a very popular story where this cat at the nursing home will go into the room of someone and lay at their bed, lay at the foot of their bed, and not usually, every single time this individual dies. It's almost like this predetermined, it's an omen, if you will. Omens are a thing to a lot of people. I don't know what you think about it, but you need to let me know in the comments. I think it'd be really interesting. Another very popular one is actually in 1924, Mrs. Bliss, I like that name, Coleman. Her husband and her were living out of a rented room in Oakland, California. And she was in the habit of going back to her room each day when she had a 4 p.m. break at work. Breaking at 4 p.m., why don't you just go home for the day? I don't know. She was returning at 4. She entered the house and she saw a woman who was a third-floor tenant talking to the landlady in the hall. And there was a 183-centimeter tall, 6 foot, skeleton standing next to the tenant with a bony arm wrapped around her waist. Neither the third-floor tenant nor the landlady seemed the least bit aware of the third figure. Coleman, terrified but knowing she couldn't explain the weird vision, rushed past the two women and took shelter in her room. Wonder what's going to happen. 3 weeks later, the third-floor tenant died, leaving her children motherless. Well, that's terrible. All right, you're sitting there, you're hanging out in your condo, your apartment, your house, whatever. You go outside and you're talking to your neighbors, you're getting your mail. Maybe they're getting the mail at the same time. And there's a dude, it's a skeleton, just standing 6 foot tall, with their arm around your neighbor while he's getting his mail. Do you say something? You say like, hey, there's a thing. They're going to say you're on meth. They're going to call an insane asylum. Someone's going to call the police on you. I don't know. Do you? Do you not? Do you feel comfortable to say, you know what? You've got something over there. I don't know. I would keep a close eye on that neighbor for the following few weeks because apparently if they're anything like the third floor tenant, they gone. They gone. I mean, this is the rabbit hole that I find myself getting in, which I'll pause real quick. Yet has re-entered the charts. It's 23 at Billboard, which it re-entered at its own merit, and it's exciting because last time is at radio, my next single, and it debuted. It's at 40, and it's only like a day and a half into. So I'm thrilled and excited to know that like 2 singles are charting nationwide. Next to like Jelly Roll and Taylor Swift, and you know, it's pretty exciting. It's very exciting, actually. Thank you all for the support. But the rabbit hole that I find myself in as I just wait for reports and charts and things, or just all this stuff like omens, talking about, are people really, do you want to know when you die? Which is interesting because that's what last time is about. It's about if you knew when you were going to die, what would you do? Who would you spend that time with? Would you want to know? Let me know. This is another story of, I don't know, omens. I don't like that word. It sounds, well, it reminds me of the horror film, The Omen, which I don't watch those movies because they scare me because I'm a sis. The English Civil War, it was from 1642, I believe, something like that, 1650, 51. It upended the lives of a couple of individuals, Sir Richard and his wife Anne. And then in 1649, when they found themselves obligated to quickly vacate their residence in Ireland. I'm Irish. Maybe it's my family. Then before their neighbors tried to hang them. See, that's what would happen if you told somebody that they had a skeleton just wrapped around. They'd probably try to hang you. That's not very funny. They found themselves spending a night at the castle of Lady Honora, Honara? I don't know. After dinner and some polite conversation, these individuals, the couple, they excuse themselves to go to their room. And around 1 a.m., the lady, the wife, she was awoken by a voice coming from the window. She went and opened it, the curtain, to discover a woman leaning into the window from outside. The woman wore white and had red hair and a ghastly complexion. That sounds terrible. She cried out the ancient Irish call of morning and then melted away like a cloud. The wife immediately woke her husband to tell him what happened. Her name's Lady Frenshaw. It's my aunt, Lady Frenshaw. The following morning, before the Frenshaws could find a way to describe the strange event to Lady O'Brien, this is the owner of the castle, the latter told them that she herself had not slept well that night, for in a different part of the castle she had stayed up to care for an ailing cousin, who had died at 2 a.m. She then expressed that the Frenshaws slept well. She hoped that she did. And then she gave them the best room in the castle, but forgot that a spectral woman appeared in that room's window whenever a family member was dying. So in other words, this ghastly complected woman just floats up to the window in this best room, and every time someone's about to die in the castle, they tell somebody that's lying in there. That's pretty interesting. Could you imagine, like, I feel like I've had things happen, but I don't want to go to like a, Holiday Inn Express in Birmingham, Alabama, and then have some ghastly figure just floating outside the cheap plastic blinds where the air conditioner's below it. And they're like, ooh, and saying some Irish morning prayer. No thanks. I don't know what I would do. I mean, like, I think about this because I'm always curious to get in the mind of someone. Like when I go live on TikTok and you're doing they do the preview and you're scrolling through, I always wonder, what are people thinking? Not because I worry about what they think per se. I'm just curious, like if I'm in the Holiday Inn Express and this woman appears out my window and I run down the stairs and I go to the lobby and I'm like, there is a woman floating outside the window. That's going to go over really well. That's going to go over very well. My medication would be amped up. I'm certain of it. So the thought of that is pretty interesting. It's amazing that these stories have continued to pass down because people telling the story, they'd be like, what the hell is wrong with you? Let's keep rolling. 1934, Elliot O'Donnell. And he actually made note of this strange experience of a young woman of the Mackenzie family in Scotland. What's up with Scotland and Ireland? And anyway, said young woman had gone upstairs one morning to fetch a pail of water. No, to fetch something from her bedroom, and she heard something in the room fall. Annoyed, she looked around for the source of the noise and found that an old-fashioned silver candlestick just like Sir Ellington, it had fallen next to her dresser. She walked over to pick it up and stopped as she realized what had knocked the candlestick over. An arm was protruding from the wall. That's like funhouse, scary funhouse stuff. That's dark. That's what I envision when I hear the word omen. Not like a sweet person just being like, hey, or a cat going to lie at the foot of a sweet little elderly person in a nursing home, which that is true. There are tons of stories about that, where the nurses and CNAs will watch these cats, and if they enter into a room and spend a day or two, they're like, oh, well, Mr. Smith, we better prep. Anyway, regarding the arm, it was only visible from the elbow down, with very white skin, like me, and long fingers and finely finished nails that showed it belonged to a woman. But maybe it was just really pretty fingernails on a man. But the rest of the woman wasn't there. As the young woman stared, the limb slowly faded from view. She immediately feared for her mother, as she had been told that a phantom hand, was an omen that appeared before a death in her family. And her mother was very ill at the moment. Luckily, her mother fully recovered, but a few days after the arm was seen, a letter arrived to inform them of the death of the young woman's cousin. So the arm knows. Fear the bow. Like, know before you go, look for the elbow. That's so stupid. I don't mean to make light of it, because you have to take into consideration and account that some people really do. I'm not saying I don't believe in it, but some people really do believe in these omens and call them whatever you wish, but people really do believe in this stuff. So I just tend to make light of, because otherwise we're just going to sit here in a depressed rabbit hole together, snuggled up in this freezing studio. All right, this is a family's curse. This is another Ewan McLean's greed in 1538. Was the son and heir to the chief of the McLeans, and he didn't understand why he had to wait to take his father's wealth. Harsh words were said, and soon the demands turned into an argument, and the argument into a fight. The fight then became a split in the clan, leaving father and son to lead opposing forces into battle against each other in the 1500s. I mean, that's pretty common back then. During the heated battle, one of the elder McLean's supporters beheaded Ewan with a single stroke of his weapon, but Ewan's body didn't fall from his horse. Is this the Headless Horseman? Instead, the corpse lashed out to the left and right, striking nearby clansmen before his horse bolted from the field of battle for home. Now, before I keep going, this is the this is the work that I do. I was researching and did a video. So back in the day when the guillotine was popular and people were standing and watching as people had their heads, nonetheless, it was like just a common thing. It was like, let's go to the square and watch people be beheaded. But then they were like, are they still alive? So they would take the time to put, smells, aroma patches under the nose. They would poke the head. They would put drops to irritate the eyes to see if there was a reaction. There was even a man who was in charge of the guillotine whose friend was going to be beheaded. And before he was beheaded, he was like, hey, give me a sign. And allegedly, this has been passed down by quite a few different stories and accounts, the head winked. Now, I know I'm a little off topic, doctors say it's impossible. The moment the head is beheaded, you go into a coma for extreme blood loss immediately. Whereas when they've done tests on lab rats, I'm not saying I condone this, but when they behead their lab rats, they live 3.7 seconds. And there's even what they call the wave of death, which is at 1 minute, the brain activity picks back up. And I've done videos on the wave of death. If they can figure out when that death wave is, then they say they can reverse death, because after or during the wave of death, then it's inevitable. Nonetheless, the hard work I do. All right, let's go back to the beheaded guy. That sounds like the Headless Horseman, but apparently this is to say that their death is going to occur. So he didn't fall from the horse. His body was lashing around and hitting different clansmen. When the horse arrived back at Ewan's castle with the body still on, the servants were horrified to see their master minus his head. The corpse was still sitting up in the saddle, twitching randomly. This is very gory. Convinced that the devil himself could be to blame, the servants decapitated the horse. I'm glad Amanda's not on here. Before burying what they had of Master Ewan. Ever since, the McLean clan of the Lochbuie, B-U-I-E, district has lived in fear of encountering the headless ghost of Ewan McLean, still riding his favorite horse and sporting the green cape. Obviously, this had turned into the Headless Horseman. Let's just go ahead and say that. But apparently, it probably happened. I wouldn't, not necessarily this to a T, but could you imagine all that? You know, all the battles and sword slinging and arrows piercing, and now we're talking about mist. Anything involving mist, you know, Stephen King loves the mist. The mist is the thing, and apparently it's an omen of sorts. But nonetheless, I didn't mean for this to get into this weird rabbit hole of like gore. You know, just reading the notes. Just reading the notes. This doesn't necessarily inspire the songs. The songs are inspired by the works of many, and the works of caring for those who are at their most delicate of moments in time. But I'm telling you, people love to know about ghosts, and I have a really cool series about to come out that I'm really excited for you to see, because these are things that can happen to your body after your death. And I'll just leave it there because these are insane. I was like, oh my gosh. And it's actually 100% true. But let's talk about the mist. If you want to talk about the mist, we'll talk about the mist. It's fine. In Wales, of course, we're in Wales again. Stories are told. I don't even know how to pronounce this. It's like Gwrach, a profoundly ugly winged hag. Oh, it's like a hag. Like you call a woman, a mean, ugly woman, a hag. That's not very nice. It comes in the dead of night to flap its wings against the window of a house in which a death will occur while calling out the name of the doomed party. That's not cool. That's what Wirt Sykes thought before he started collecting tales from Welsh farmers. Interesting, in 1880 for his book British Goblins. So apparently a lot of people had experienced this hag. And could you imagine? Okay, you've got a hag hanging out your window, and they're like, Nathan. And you're like, shit. Like, dang it. Apparently one of the farmers that they talked to, they told of a strange thing that happened to him in November 1878. So whenever you can get like specific dates and years, that's whenever I start to feel there's more validity to this person's encounter, right? It's like, you know, back in the 16th century, okay, you know, but I know when very profound things happen in my life, the day, the year, and even the time, I can even reflect upon what I was wearing, which is why I write in my notebook during the day and during the night, which if you like podcasts, you can subscribe to Bonus Noise because it's like my journal and I'm like reading my journal. I kind of water it down, but nonetheless, he says that he was visiting an old friend when he was awoken around midnight by the frightful screeching and shaking of the window. That's scary. I mean, I would have peed my pants. Startled but curious, the farmer ran to the window and threw it open. He saw this figure flying away, which looked over its shoulder back at him, and he knew it was this hag. The strange hag had disheveled red hair, chalky skin, wings, and teeth like tusks. So like a walrus with red hair. She wore a long black gown that trailed behind her. It appeared as if she had no body below her arms and within the billowing material. She screeched. Eesh. The farmer kept looking into the darkness and saw her again. She entered the front door of the nearby Cow and Snuffers Inn. Cow and Snuffers. He waited for some time but saw and heard nothing. The following day, the farmer found out that the man who kept the inn had died that night. So it's like the Grim Reaper, but a very, very, very scary version of. I would rather the Grim Reaper in the black and like the flowing gown that with the thing, like the, what's that called? Like the, I would have them absolutely join me over that thing. The abused cat. Here's a cat. There's the cat one. So let's talk about some cats. So during the early 1800s, Miss Hartnell's, interesting, family were staying in a manor house, which was so large that they only occupied one wing of it, keeping the rest locked up most of the time for the rats. Part of the unused manor was a hallway that had a sinister feel to it. I talk about the feelings a lot, like you go into a room, you go into a house, you go into a group of people. I mean, like it's the fight or flight in us as we've evolved over the centuries. I mean, we used to be hunter-gatherers, now we DoorDash, but like it was something that we were very hyper aware of our environment. So I think it's important for us to acknowledge that, not to talk about the omen or use that as a way to transition, but really, I mean, like if you feel it in your gut, if you feel it in your heart, and you're like, then you're probably right. Nonetheless, what was I talking about? Oh yeah, it was locked up most of the time. It had a sinister feel to it. But Mrs. Hartnell, in her adventurous youth, decided to investigate it. Of course she did. In different various occasions, she experienced many strange things in that hallway, but the strangest was the apparent ghost of a mutilated cat a black cat at that, with one eye and paw missing, torn ears, and a slow, curious way of moving. 3 times she encountered this strange creature. We all know what's going to happen. The first time she saw the cat, it crept out of a doorway. And then, let's see, that evening her brother died. 2 years later, she found herself exploring the hallway again. When something struck the small of her back, spinning around, she found the cat, as bloody and maimed as before, and convulsing as if on the edge of its own death. This is interesting. That night, her mother died. 4 years later, she was in the hall again. Why would she go on? But not on her own choice. Okay. She had been sent on an errand by her father that required her to pass through the hall, and presumably she had not told him anything of her previous experiences. And then she completed the task that she was asked to do as quick as possible, and on her way out, the shadow appeared in the doorway again. She saw the cat. Her father dropped dead that afternoon. After the death of the father, her and the siblings left, and they didn't want to have anything to do with knowing the cat. So this goes back to my song that's streaming that's at radio, releases on Friday. It's like, do you want to know? I mean, like, if you knew that there was this mangled cat, that was your way of being told, hey, you or someone you love are going to die. Would you want to? I don't think I would. That's scary as hell. It's like, can I not just walk through my house to the pantry for some puffin cereal without being fearful of this cat appearing? That's my thought. That's my thought. This is my channel. I can think what I want. The Oxenham's questionable omen. Let me guess. This is in Scotland. No, I don't know. Let's see. 1641, a pamphlet was published in London entitled A True Relation of an Apparition in the Likeness of a Bird. So what would you like your book title to be? A True Relation of an Apparition in the Likeness of a Bird, with a white breast that appeared hovering over the deathbeds of some of the children of Mr. James Oxenham of Sale. Oh no, which tells you a lot about the pamphlet. This explained how 5 relatives were each visited by a white-breasted bird that mysteriously appeared and disappeared before their deaths in 1618 and 1635. Now, jokes aside, like the white dove, if you see depictions on stained glass windows in churches and so forth, you see this white dove and then the light. So there's a lot of stories pertaining to, from a spiritual aspect, the holiness of, as far as death and resurrection. So it's interesting to think about. The story proved popular, and it soon became a well-known legend of a family omen, except it actually wasn't. The story in the original pamphlet had been invented just to have something to sell. Interesting. Was it invented, though? Because, like, it's been depicted this way as far as the white bird. Anyway, 3 of the victims never existed in the book. 1 died on a different date than mentioned in the pamphlet, and the family never lived in this area. The witnesses named in the pamphlet also did not appear to have existed. Interesting. Which makes what happened after the publication even stranger. Okay, so back to what I was saying, like, they're talking about this pamphlet that they might have created as far as they did make up names, but it did depict that of like a white, they call it just a likeness of a bird, whereas you see these white doves in the spiritual, like in the spiritual aspect. So in 1743, over a century after this false pamphlet, if you all are following me, pamphlet was made telling stories of people that died after they appeared. Nonetheless, it wasn't true, but then people did die, and then now they're like, well, that wasn't real because these dates aren't right and this person didn't exist. But 1743, William Oxenham was in his chambers with some friends when, for some unknown reason, a white bird flew through. Okay, here we go. Aware of the rumored death omen for his family. Okay, so this is the family. He was not sick enough to die and that he should not cheat the bird, so he was joking about that. This surely brought a laugh from those in attendance. Oxenham died 2 days later of a sudden illness. Interesting. It's not true. Fake news. Shit happened. Still fake news. 1700s, Oxenham's like, hey, I knew of this, but this was fake news. This is funny. I'm not dead. I'm not deathly ill. Dies 2 days later because they saw a bird. So is it not fake news? Interesting. This looks like Farquhar, but it's Farquhar. Farquhar? 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 Huh. Interesting. This is in London again in 1796. This is weird. People have been passing these stories down and experiences down for forever. Forever. So in 1769, before he settled in London, actually, this is a physician. He was visiting the area. He was called to assist the wife of the steward at Barry Pomeroy Castle. Excuse me, I'm going to go to the Pomeroy Castle. I'll be back in just a little bit. When he arrived, he was shown to an outer apartment and asked to wait there. So this is a story of another, I guess, omen in the 1700s. As he waited, a young and well-dressed woman, who he took to be a member of the family, entered the room. He offered polite greetings, but she ignored his presence. She seemed very worried about something and constantly wrung her hands as she crossed the room to the bottom of a stairwell. As she climbed, a sunbeam lit up her face. This sounds pleasant so far. I'm just saying, this sounds very pleasant. So, let's keep going. She was struck by both how beautiful this woman was and how fantastically sad and hopeless she looked. In a moment, she was gone, and he was called to attend to the ailing wife, whose condition, was earlier not as bad, condition immediately worsened. So the doctor returned to the castle. Almost said the house. No, this is the castle. This is the castle. The castle the following morning to check on the patient, who was clearly doing much better than the day before. Now that the emergency had passed, the doctor asked the steward about the young lady. The doctor couldn't have predicted the reaction he got. He was quoted saying, my poor wife, the steward started. When pressed, the steward explained that the daughter of a previous baron of Barry Pomeroy had given birth to her own father's child. This is getting real deep. This is like Jerry Springer stuff. The unfortunate young woman had then later strangled the child to death in the chamber above the room that the doctor had been waiting in. What in the hell? The young woman that the doctor had seen was a ghost, one that only appeared to basically say that a death is within the castle. She had appeared before the steward's son drowned, and now the steward was sure that her presence meant that his wife was doomed. Despite the doctor's assurances that she was recovering and that the steward's worries were groundless, the steward's wife died that day at noon. All right, so we've learned a ton of lessons here. Mangled cat. You or someone you love are goners. Don't hurt a cat. They're innocent creatures. Number 2, you see something out your window, you're either a nut or someone's going to die, and you go running through the lobby of the Holiday Inn Express, and you might end up arrested. And everyone in Scotland, Ireland, and London, they have death experiences a lot. And then last but certainly not least, we'll talk about the friendly visit. So if I were to be told I was going to die, I would love it to be, before I even share this one, but I would love it to be someone I love to be like, listen, Nathan, you're going to die. And then I would say, you're a nut. Something's wrong with your brain. I don't know. I mean, who are we to say that this stuff is, my jokes are in no way making light of something that's otherwise really heavy, but are in no way saying that this doesn't happen or hadn't happened or variations of, or people don't have the ability to experience. So keep that in mind. I mean, there have been stranger things that have occurred. I mean, the government has said forever that there aren't UFOs, and then magically, all of a sudden during COVID, no one was none the wiser. It's like, oh yeah, we do have UFOs. Even though people had seen you, nonetheless, that's probably a terrible analogy in comparison, but this is in 1974. And this is Dr. Kerchik was enjoying the day. Apparently, it was a very pretty day. He was next to his Chase. He was in his Chase lounge next to his pool, and then the slow evening was approaching slowly. The cool breeze and the sound of birds comforted him. So this dude's just chilling, enjoying some lemonade probably. A sudden noise in the brushes were by his house. He stood up to go see what it was. He stopped 2 steps later. Dr. Kerchik was looking at a skeletal figure wearing a monk's hood and robes. And despite the apparition's eyes just being hollow, dark holes, he could sense the figure looking back at him. Now, this sounds like the Grim Reaper. I mean, God. Like, who gets the job of the Grim Reaper? Who's the person that becomes the Grim Reaper? And they're like, you know what? You're in charge. If that is to be what happens and they go and they kind of appear, not to everyone, but if they have had a Grim Reaper experience, they're like, you know what? You're assigned the Grim Reaper duties today. That's scary. The thin skin was pulled so tight over the face that the structure of the skull was highlighted and its visible teeth were partly open, and what Kerchik felt was meant to be a friendly smile. The strange figure beckoned to Kerchik with a bony hand, like frozen in the place with fear. Eventually, the strange vision faded. I would think I'm like heat stroked. If Kerchik had wondered what the odd visit was about at the time, he felt he knew a few months later, because when he was diagnosed with terminal cancer and then died. What are your thoughts on this? Do you think it's real? Do you think that, aside from all these stories, like the thought of people having this sense of understanding by visions or by being greeted by, you can even take it, it has been documented so many countless times across the globe from different people, as far as even under hospice care. Like my late grandfather, my late grandmother, while dying, actively dying, they are seeing family members who have died before them, who have made themselves known, who essentially are saying it's going to be okay, who they acknowledge, and who some who don't believe say, oh, it's the medication, or oh, it's memories flooding their mind, or it's their brain shoot. You hear all kinds of ways to debunk it. Nonetheless, my late grandfather's mother died when he was 11 years old. So he, at 87 years young, had lived such a long life outside of what he recalled with his mother. His mother was boated out of during the 37th flood in Paducah, Kentucky. They lived in the apartment. That was the last time he saw her. She was dying of cancer, and she was in a boat going out. Nonetheless, he sees her in the room, standing next to a cousin that had died, and is talking about their mom, talking about what she's wearing. It's very interesting. I mean, people have this happen all the time. And if you want to call that an omen, or people who are on this side of life and on the other side of life, in a sense, there's this level of transition that's happening, and they're seeing. I mean, I as someone who believes in, I believe in that. I believe in that. So who am I to say that this isn't true? And who am I to say also that these are maybe depictions of there's good and there's evil? Who am I to say what is either? Because I can only speak for myself. There's a lot here to unpack. I would be interested to hear what people's thoughts are on this whole omen thing. And the word omen is an ugly word, just like grits or okra. That's an ugly word. I don't like omen. Sign or experience. Anyway, that is my rabbit hole for the day. We've talked about guillotines. We've talked about, there's so many cool things that, period. Move that out of the way. There's so many cool things happening right now with music. The new episode of You'll Die Trying is out. There's the podcast, Bonus Noise, subscribers only $4.99 a month. There's also, my song is amazingly killing it first few days at radio. So I have 2 charting singles at radio across the country. Like Taylor Swift has 3. I'm like this is insane. Thanks for all the support. Thanks for subscribing here. Thank you very much. Share the channel, because this channel is growing leaps and bounds, and we're releasing unique content all the time. There you have it. I'm omened out. My nose is about to start running for how frigidly cold it is. My toes are gone. Maybe it's an omen that I'm going. If so, adios.